Some stories never truly end. Some places refuse to be forgotten. This is one such story, a tale of an abandoned mansion, a cursed ancestor, and the nightmarish horrors that lurk within. The storm raged outside as Ethan's parents fled Blackwood Manor in the dead of night. They didn't pack. They didn't look back. They just ran. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating their terrified faces as they clutched Ethan, then just a child, rushing him into a car that skidded over the muddy road. His mother sobbed quietly, whispering prayers under her breath. His father gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. Something was chasing them. Ethan was too young to understand, but he knew one thing. They never spoke of that house again. Years passed. It was now 2024. Ethan had grown into a man, a rational thinker, a skeptic of ghosts and curses. He was newly married to Rachel, and when an old family tradition required them to visit their ancestral land, Ethan saw it as the perfect chance to unravel the mystery. His family begged him not to go. "That house was never meant to be lived in," his uncle warned. "You won't be alone in there." But Ethan laughed it off. Superstition, old folk tales, nothing more. So, despite the warnings, despite the fear in his mother's eyes, Ethan and Rachel packed their bags and drove toward Blackwood Village. When they arrived, the village was unsettlingly quiet. The locals avoided eye contact, their conversations halting as Ethan walked past. He could feel it in the air. They knew. At his uncle's house, a thick silence fell over dinner when he asked about the mansion. Finally, his uncle sighed. "No one has set foot in that house in 40 years. Ethan scoffed. "Why? Ghosts?" His uncle's face darkened. "No, something worse." He refused to say more. That night, Ethan and Rachel lay in bed, but sleep never came. Outside, the wind howled. A branch scraped against the window. And then, there was a whisper. Rachel bolted upright. "Did you hear that?" Ethan shook his head, annoyed. "It's the wind." But Rachel wasn't convinced. She swore she heard something. Something right outside their door. Ethan got up, swung the door open. Nothing. Just the cold, empty hallway. The next morning, Ethan insisted on going to Blackwood Manor. They drove up the winding road leading to the estate, and when they finally saw it, Rachel's breath hitched. There it stood. A massive, decaying mansion, its once grand facade now draped in vines. The tall iron gates stood rusted, half open, as if waiting for them. The front door was slightly ajar, waiting. Ethan stepped inside first. The air was thick with dust, but beneath it, something else, something rotten. The grand chandelier still hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. The dining table was set. The chairs were pulled out, as if a meal had just been abandoned. The plates sat untouched, covered in mold and decay. And then, Rachel gasped. A single candle on the mantel was still burning. The flame suddenly extinguished. Rachel grabbed Ethan's arm. "Ethan, we shouldn't be here." But Ethan refused to be frightened by a draft. They decided to stay. That night, Rachel worked to clean up the dust, while Ethan went into town for supplies. She was alone. Rachel froze. The floorboards above her groaned. She held her breath. Someone was upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps creaked above her head. Her pulse pounded. "Ethan," she called, though she knew he wasn't there. Silence. Then, a voice. low, raspy, right behind her. "This house is mine, not yours." Rachel spun around. Nothing. Trembling, Rachel turned toward the hallway, toward the master bedroom. A shadow passed by the doorway. She saw him. A tall, thin figure, dressed in Victorian-era clothes, stepped inside. He looked like Ethan, or, at least, something that wore his face. Rachel let out a shaky breath. "Ethan?" No response. She followed it into the bedroom. The door slammed shut behind her, and then she saw it. A man, hanging from the ceiling fan. His lifeless eyes snapped open. He grinned. Rachel screamed. Ethan was returning when he heard the first scream. Dropping everything, he sprinted toward the house. Rachel was banging on the front door, screaming to be let out. Ethan tried the handle, locked. Through the window, he saw something behind her. A shadowy figure, tall and skeletal, watching her. And then, as Ethan pounded on the door, the figure turned and looked directly at him. Its face was his. The door flew open on its own. Rachel collapsed into his arms, sobbing. But the house was empty. No figure, no sound, just silence. They fled back to his uncle's house. This time, Ethan demanded answers. His uncle finally told them the truth. The spirit haunting Blackwood Manor was none other than Edgar Blackwood, their own ancestor. A bitter, vengeful man, abandoned by his family, who had died alone in that house. Neglected, forgotten, and he never forgave them. He had driven out Ethan's parents, and now he had set his sights on them. That night, Ethan made his decision. They returned one last time. Ethan locked every door, every window. He chained the gates shut, and as they turned to leave, a low, mocking laugh echoed from inside. Without looking back, Ethan whispered, "This house belongs to the dead now." And Blackwood Manor was left to its ghost. To this day, the house stands untouched. Locals say that, on quiet nights, if you stand too close to the gates, you can still hear footsteps inside, and a voice whispering, "This house is mine, not yours."